not Navajo, and it's going to be followed by a presentation about what I know about research in Navajo. And I expect you know much more than I do. On that one, and maybe on this too. This is the research that actually many of you commented on when I asked you what precipitated the event, the IRB regulations. You were talking about Native research. None of them that I'm about to mention were, and no research with Native people at all was mentioned or at all. In fact, is almost never mentioned. What led up to the discussions about unethical research in the U.S. and then ultimately the regulations. This is simply not what was being considered, or for that matter, remembered. So, as always, I'm going to first of all say hi, Scott, see you in the Lummi way for my respected teachers. I'm going to pair share again. And for this, I would like to hear what to say. It actually can be individuals, if you don't have to agree, but what do you think is the core of indigenous research ethics, or of research ethics with tribes? I'm going to go across the other way, that table. If just brief phrases.
Please reflect
Please.
on what, in your opinion, is the essence of core natural indigenous research ethics. Spirituality and culture. I don't know.
Cultural sensitivity.
Yeah. And they're, yeah.
Making sure the research gets back to the community.
We discussed a little bit about respect, balance, meaning balance, you need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly of all research. And then we also talked about additional information regarding research so that it applies to indigenous nations.
Respect, balance, and applies to other Native people or indigenous people. Very good, thank you.
I guess knowing that you're being researched on, basically, a lot of people, Navajo people would say, you know, researchers come in, they do research on us. We don't know the outcome of the research, and the message is not getting back to them.
I think the good research is preserving the culture, the language, and so on.
Keep on remembering these. I'm not going to try to repeat them because we're going to come back to this later.
I think the essence is how it benefits the community and the cultural protocols.
Okay.
What we said was the respect of the culture and the spirituality of the research, and like you said, if research comes back to the community to help the community.
Thank you. Again, remember what you say. We're going to come back to this.
We also talked about research that benefits the community and also research in which the research question comes from the community, the questions that are important.
Thank you.
I think the main thing we talked about was respecting the culture.
The indigenous people will share stories, some very sacred knowledge with you, and that has to be respected, and that it's not to be mishandled in any way.
Very good, thank you.
We spoke about the community participation is really important.
I think one thing that we Native American tribes should also, any researcher that is doing should reflect on respect of Native American spirituality, which is different than often not in research.
Thank you. As I said, we're going to come back to that, and I'm hoping that what we come back to will be at least some of what you've said. So, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Research with Native communities. And as I said, this is not on the list. It had nothing to do with the developing the regulations, although perhaps it should have. An early example was social science in the service of eugenics. This was in Vermont in the first third of the 20th century, where surveys were done of, quote, dumb, unquote, or, quote, delinquent, unquote, children and their families. Guess who these, quote, dumb and delinquent people were? We already talked about this in the first. They were Catholic French Canadians, poor migrants, or, yes, Abenaki Indians. And the, oops, sorry. That wasn't quite right. I guess I'm going backwards. Let's try it this way. Here we go. Vermont sterilized some of these dumb and delinquent, in quotes, women because they were, again, inferior genetically. This was the understanding and the purpose, and therefore they didn't want them to have children. This was not just in Vermont. This particular book is about the Vermont experience, but it happened in actually the majority of the states. And that's the title if you want to read the book. So that was bad research. Here's another example, the second one. In the 1960s and 70s, researchers from a Northeastern university went to the Barrow, which was the town most north in Alaska. It's above the Arctic Circle. There's actually now a tribal college there, Lake Saugvik. But at that time in the late 60s, early 70s, people from this university, 5,000 miles away, studied alcoholism and the adverse effects of alcoholism on the people of Barrow. And they announced their findings about how bad the alcoholism was affecting the people of Barrow in a news conference in their university, 5,000 miles away. This was at a time when the North Slope Barrow was floating bonds on Wall Street. It hit the front page of the New York Times and Washington Post, and the value of the bonds went belly up, I guess you'd say. But that's the harm that is usually talked about. But that is not the harm that I am most concerned about, and I think was the biggest harm. This was internal stigmatization. Remember we talked about that before with IQ research. Internal stigmatization. We, the Barrow people, are bad people. We are alcoholics, even though many were not. We do these bad things. And I came across that when I was speaking with an elder who was not from Barrow, but from one of the outlying villages. And that's what she told me. She was 14 at the time. She's now an elder. She said, I felt very badly, and I still do, and it was with tears in her eyes, of what that had done to the self-understanding of people. So the harms were done by dissemination of the results. In a way, that's also the example in Vermont. What happened when that report was done? Well, people used that report, the state of Vermont used that report to sterilize people. In this case, it was just to characterize a whole community. That's one article about it. There are others in that same journal, in that same issue. We now get to the third bad example, and this is, I think, two different people mentioned this. The ASU study at Havasupai. By the way, I just want to go back. Remember I talked about don't call that research with syphilis Tuskegee study. It's a U.S. public health study on the effects of untreated syphilis. This was not the Barrow study. It was actually done by a Center for Research called Acts of Man, Effects of Alcoholism. That's the study. It was done, I want to emphasize who did the study, not on whom the study was done. Well, the same thing here. This was not the Havasupai research or study. This was the ASU research on Havasupai. It was in the early 1990s where the tribe approved a diabetes research. They had a problem with diabetes. There was an anthropologist they had worked with from ASU and they trusted. And they said, would you get together a group of people to research we have a big problem with diabetes. We want to know what it is and what's causing it and what we can do about it. So they brought university research as others, and they were doing genetic tests on them. They also did, as was said, other tests, research with those blood samples. And there's a whole list of things you can read for sources. Now, I had called that bad research in the previous slide. This is now the ugly part of the ASU study, because part of it is extremely ugly. And this is where they actually had first of all, that neither the tribes nor the individuals were informed about these other studies. But they then had a psychology postgraduate student, still a student, volunteer, this is part of the plan, volunteer to go to Havasupai in the summer and provide counseling, free. Okay, that sounds good. Except this person, since he was there and providing counseling, got the key to the clinic, got a key to the clinic, and he went after hours, unknown to anyone, without any permission, went into the clinic and started examining charts, which is entirely all those steps, from going in after hours without permission to, and 3, just go through charts to determine who might have schizophrenia, although all that was absolutely illegal. Now that's ugly to me. The ASU IRB did not do its job. Why did this happen? This was amateur night, that's what I call it. The researcher was a very good, famous genetic researcher. But she had never done research with human beings. She did all her genetic research with Drosophila. Drosophila are fruit flies. And the reason they are studied a lot is, they multiply rapidly and all that kind of stuff. And she was doing very good research, and we needed her research. We use it, but it wasn't with human beings. This was her first time with human beings. The ASU IRB should not have allowed it to begin with. She just didn't have any experience doing that. I think the ASU IRB should not have allowed it. But what was the result of this? The fear of this ugly research, of course, led to not just the suit, but to tribes not permitting research with anyone from any of the Arizona state universities. Not just ASU, but also UA, University of Arizona, Northern Arizona University. For a long time, there was a great reluctance to participate. So there is something that good come out of it. My understanding, and I hope I'm not mischaracterizing Arizona, but that Arizona is not in the lead for being a state that works closely and respects tribes and has a well-respected government-to-government relationship. That's my understanding of Arizona, and if I'm wrong and Arizona does have that, I apologize to the state, but I think it was part of that experience. However, as a result of this ASU study in Havasupai and the suits and all that, the Board of Regents actually just recently established a code of conduct for research with Indians, and even issued a policy that it would have a government-to-government relationship with the tribes of Arizona. I assume that's the first time any official Arizona anything out of the government has made that policy. Perhaps we should say it's about time, but in any case, so there's some good that has come out of this whole experience. It's not completely all ugly. Anyone want to make a comment about? Okay. Well, we now get to the ugliest research that I'm aware of with Native people. It is very ugly. This is not widely known. As a matter of fact, I think I'm the only one, other than people I talk to, who knows about it. I found out some time ago, and before, about this research, and before I started to talk about it, I went to the tribe and gave them this information, which they were not aware of, and also asked if it was okay for me to talk about it in public. I did not want to talk about it in public if they said no. That's tribal self-determination, and I was not going to do something they would not want me to do. They said yes, okay to talk about it. So that's why I'm mentioning it here. But I also heard from the discussion, understood that some people were uncomfortable about mentioning the tribe's name. And so I don't mention the tribe's name. They didn't specifically ask me not to, but because I respected all that discussion, I don't. This was a tribe in the upper Midwest. In 1966 and 1967, had an epidemic of what is called impetigo. It's a skin infection that normally is nothing big deal. But it's caused by streptococcus, among other things, actually caused by the two different staph and strep together. But it's often in young kids. It forms scabs and yellow scabs that, will just, after the infection's over, will go off. And it normally doesn't cause any permanent damage. But there are some strains of strep that can cause kidney damage. And they were having an epidemic in 1966 and 1967 of that kind of impetigo, and the kidney damage was what's called acute glomerulonephritis. Not going to use that term again. Let's just call it sudden kidney disease, which usually in kids, not 100%, usually in kids, lasts for a period of time. They don't need dialysis, and goes away. And at that time, and until 2 years ago, no one knew if having that in childhood caused any kidney damage to have a higher rate of causing dialysis in adulthood. We now know that it does, but that's a separate, we didn't know anything about it then. It hadn't been studied. But a few kids do have to go on dialysis for a period of time until they weather the storm, if you will, and the kidneys come back to normal, or apparent normal. And once in a while, kids die. So this is usually what's called a benign, okay, not serious disease, but not in everyone. Now the researchers knew about a previous epidemic in the same reservation about 13 years earlier, and knew that the treatment to prevent and stop the epidemic was to give every child, whether they had any symptoms, any skin infection, not every child a shot of long-acting penicillin. And it stopped the epidemic cold in its tracks. Even then, because it took a while to find out what it was, at least one, and I was told by members of the tribe, a second child died from that first epidemic. So again, this is serious. Even though not usually serious, this is serious, and had already caused 1 and maybe 2 deaths in an earlier epidemic on the same reservation. And the researchers knew all that. They did not tell the doctors then, different set of doctors, how to treat it. They just said, do whatever you want. That's unethical. And why did they do that? Because they had at the university a new gizmo, an electron microscope. And no one had ever studied what the kidney tissue actually looked like in early acute glomerulonephritis, in early stages of this kidney disease. And they could do that. And that's what they did. So they didn't want to stop the epidemic, they wanted it to continue. So they could study more kids. Take them to the university, do some routine tests, which are not very bad, blood and urine, standard stuff. But then also do kidney biopsies for the electron microscope. And they did. And they did kidney biopsies on 31 children with 4 repeat, 4 repeated biopsies. And they also did, of that 31 children who did not have impetigo, which you never should do, period. And this was just maybe 3 years after after kidney biopsies came in as a way to find out what was the kidney disease. It used a big needle compared to now. Now, kidney biopsies for anyone with a kidney disease is routine, no biggie. Back then, it was not routine. They did not have a way of localizing where the kidney was. It was a big needle, and basically what they did, they would take an X-ray of what's called the flat plate of the abdomen, just look at get the spine from the chest down. They would figure out where they could see the outline of the kidney. And they would cut down the vertebrae to where was the proper vertebrae on a human being that they saw X-ray, go over a space either side, and start jabbing the needle in until they finally got kidney tissue. Again, things don't be scared of a kidney biopsy nowadays. It's different. It's done with ultrasound, and they know where they're going. And it's a small needle. Back in those days, this was a serious thing. And they did this, the youngest child was 1 year and 3 months. 4 months. 1 year and a little bit older, small child, going through this, counting down the vertebrae and jabbing around for a very small kidney. This is ugly research. It was ugly because they didn't allow the doctors, they didn't tell what they knew to the doctors to end the epidemic to begin with, put the kids at risk, took them away from home, took them to the university, did these biopsies on these kids as young as only a little bit older than a year. All were under 10, average age 6. I am angry. These were physicians, researchers, all of them. And when I said earlier about the Nazis and those physicians, this, to my mind, matches. This is the ugliest research I have ever heard of. And that's what I'm telling you about.
Dr. Freeman, what have you heard about why this happens? That doctors don't know what the researchers are doing. It happened over at UNM several summers ago, where UNM interns went out to do...
Can we hold that? Please.
Okay.
I'm going to come back to that.
Oh, okay, good.
But I wanted to pause.
All right.
Already said all that. I wanted to pause. This is so bad. I've asked Mr. Garcia to say a prayer for those kids and their families, and for us and for me. I think I need to get back in balance. Every time I talk about this, I get out of balance, Mr. Garcia.
Mr. Charlie,
Charles, excuse me.
we talk about these things and you sit here and you think about it. And Bill is right in that it bothers the mind, it bothers the spirituality, emotion when you talk about unethical research, especially involving kids, American Indian kids. And I'm honored that Bill, through my relationship with him, has asked me for a simple prayer. So that Father God, we come before you again. As we spoke earlier this morning, we come before you with something that is so grave, that is so ugly, and that we hear about these. Lord, from your good book, you tell us that children are a gift to us, that you have a special place for your love, for your guidance, in the hearts and in the mind of children. And for some of us, we believe that as Christian people. And also from our own concept that in a society, we have a way of parenting that is different than modern day Western parental society. The mother takes on the dominant caretaker role. Father, Navajo children in our society, as in all Native American societies, are the center of entire communities and basically control the parents, the way parenthood is done, the care, the guidance, the prayers, the teaching. From birth that is established through our cords that connects us even prior to being born, while we are being nourished in the wombs of our mother. This is the way that we are as Native Americans. And when we hear about these ugliness in research, even people like Bill, they are upset. They are out of balance. They are out of harmony. And based on our traditional concept, they are also not walking the beauty way as we see it. So we ask for the restoration of that balance, the restoration of that harmony, so that we here in attendance in this session here, we don't realize the gravity of what we have here, Lord. The Navajos are known as a strong maternal society that is different from Western society. And one of the reasons, according to the tradition that we held, is that the strong mother figure came from the Danae's creation history, the Nebahanet, the stories of the emergence of the Danae. It explains how this woman called Changing Woman rubbed the first 4 clans of the Navajo from her own skin. This figure, this Mother Earth figure, is meant to be the Navajo woman's role model, and it serves to establish maternal dominance in our society, in our tradition. Lord, we are stewards, these people, each one of us in here, not only the IRB of the Day College, but those that are interested, the researchers here. I can name them by name, but you know them by heart, and you know them by name, Lord. This is the gravity of what we have. Let us not shirk our duties. Let us establish and let us deliver these policies in fairness, these regulations. And that we as stewards of these policies, let us never release these obligations. Let us not hurt our children, any Native American children, any non-Native American that comes into our lives, Lord. This is what we're facing. And when I talked to Bill a while ago, I saw the hurt and I heard the pain in his voice. And he comes to us with reassurances that this society that the Navajo has, the maternal society, is so unique. It's different from Western society, where we have a dominance through motherhood, through our children. So I pray, Lord, this prayer, help him and help us one another. That in God, as we come before you, because it troubles Bill, set him and his mind, Lord, restore that balance. In God, it is Ashtoba Hassan. Ahalia Pensekes. It's Sisizini. Isizini Nilchim. Yat ego Moina Nilchim. Ashin Zare with own Hasses. A cocon and in him, the Gabajane is good. Lord, none see. He combination hidden ne up. Bahane, Bigade. It's so doesn't corner. And I, as a Christian man, home, but so this. Oh, share should God home. Ik Asha. No, be none, the should in God. Jonah him kindle corner behind them. What I think you need on this. You know that these things still occur because we just heard from you and them. And these are other places. I know there's other places, Lord. Let not the Lake College, let not its IRB, let it not be as such that we are the protectors of the innocent, our children. That we are the protectors of this dominant society that is ingrained in motherhood. Let us not shirk our duties. We pray this, and I am so honored, Lord, that my friend Bill asked me to say this simple prayer. God, and we give you homage. We give you glory, and we magnify, we ask you for guidance. Let us be steward, Lord. Teach us. Let us be the protectors of the young, our own children, our future. Lord, amen and amen. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Charlie. And I apologize for the mistake. I have a reputation for not remembering names, people, or anything else. Yes, Mr. Moore.
I'm just, astounded by how research takes place. Some of these seems like institutions or programs that do research. They don't follow them. The researchers do whatever they want to, whatever they please, and without any review or inspection. I was just wondering, why something like this would happen at a university. We always think that universities are places where the most intelligent people, smart people, moral people work. And yet these things happen. And I was just wondering, why would you think that something like that would happen when researchers do make mistakes? And knowing that they're not doing the right thing, they go ahead and do it. The UNM interns went out to do phlebotomy, and they used dirty needles. They use needles on one person, then they use the same ones on another person. So things like that go on all the time. This is just recent. It's after all this HIV epidemics and so forth. So I was wondering, what you thought, about why it would happen.
I don't know that circumstance, what happened. And I'm not an expert in human psychology. We do have at least one expert here. But it does seem to me that there are two things. One is that some people are ready to cut corners for convenience, and they forget the standards that they learned. It sounds like maybe that was your example. Or, and certainly with the example in this tribe in the upper Midwest, and there are other not as ugly research, but with the same motivator. We've already talked about it. People who are considered by the researcher to be inferior, not like them, not valuable, they feel free to do this kind of stuff. Would they ever have done this research on their own, less than 2-year-old to less than 10-year-old child? Hell no. When I think about what is the standard I use for judging research, I ask, would you do the research on your own mother, auntie, uncle, brother, sister, daughter, son? And if the answer is no, it shouldn't be done on anyone. But like that chair of the IRB that said these women don't deserve to be protected because they're harming their child, if it was their daughter who tested positive, they still would not have given the results to the district attorney. Those kinds of people are us, and we handle things differently. That was going on with the Nazis, it went on with this tribe, just about every example I have. And by the way, have I ever considered someone to be different than me and my family? Yes, I have. I suspect everyone in this room has at one time or another. I hope we all learn from it. I hope I learn from it. I hope I don't do it again. Welcome to the club of human beings. I'd like to finish. Any other comments? I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Charlie, for getting me back in balance. I really did need it. And it helped other people too, who got very angry. Let's not let it happen again. Almost finished, and then I'll take, if we could take just a 5-minute break, and then come back and finish before lunch comes. I don't want to end with all bad research. Not all research with native people, tribal people and tribes have been bad. And here's a very good one. This was with, it's called the People Awakening Project in Alaska. And they had been, you already heard about the study by the Northeast University Center that looked at part of Alaska. By the way, just to put things in perspective, do you know that Alaska, if put on, superimposed on the United States, would go from the Canadian border to the bottom of the Mexican border, from the East Coast to the West Coast? If you divide Alaska in half, my wife is Alaskan, so I have to say this, right? As an Alaska native. If you divide Alaska in half, Texas would be the 3rd largest state. Anyway, this is in Alaska. They had already had so much research about the bad effects of alcohol. And people, especially from the Yupik community, which is part of Alaska, one of the Alaska Native groups, major groups, went to the researchers at University of Alaska Fairbanks, whom they trusted, said, we'd like to do some research, have you do research on us about alcoholism, but look at our strengths and resilience on alcohol. After all, most of us don't drink at all. There are, and just to put things in perspective, as you probably know, in the US, more Native people do not drink at all as a percentage of all Native people than in the US population. It's also true that there are more heavy drinkers and binge drinkers who are Native. But what about all these people who don't drink at all, including some people who had been heavy drinkers and they stopped and have never had alcohol since? What about them? Why don't you study us and our strengths and resilience? And that's what they did. And it was the People Awakening Project. And it interviewed people for their life histories. Two kinds of people. People who had never had a problem with alcohol. It didn't say that they never drank. They never had a problem with alcohol and were seen by the community as being leaders in what they called sobriety. But some of us down my territory call it wellness. Lifetime wellness or lifetime sobriety. And the other group they interviewed were people who had had a problem and now were in steady sobriety or wellness, had been well and stable for more than 5 years and were seen as leaders in sobriety. To look at what are the common themes in both groups about why, what helped them either stay never having a problem or once having a problem being what some people call recovery. And they did that, and they found out what they were. And if I recall correctly, it was things, they grouped them into 4 groups, 4 different group of themes. The individual, the family, the community, spirituality. And they then use that for community, of course, it was the village, or a small community in Alaska. And this led directly to an intervention. That's one of the problems with looking at the pathology. You don't know what to do with the answers. Now you know that the percentage of people in Barrow, Alaska that ended up freezing to death or beating their spouse or et cetera, et cetera. So what do you do with that information? You come up with an intervention that works. If you find out what are the strengths and resilience, at least one approach is to expand that to the next generation, to the coming generation, of increasing their strengths and resilience using all those 4 themes, 4 sets of themes. And that's what they did. And that intervention is working. This is an excellent example of what one of the researchers in that People Awakening Project calls tribally engaged and controlled research. And the 2 key words are engaged and controlled. Those Yupik people, that group, engaged and controlled the research that was done on them about their strengths and resilience. That's the phrase I use in preference to community-based participatory research, although it could be that. What are other issues? Remember I just went around at the very beginning What are your thoughts about the core? This is what I've heard over the years from indigenous people, from, I should say, native people. Protect and benefit the tribal community. They want the research to do that. I think that was mentioned. Respect elders and the knowledge of the tribe or communities, their knowledge. Respect tribe community strength and survival. Yes, you already know, you have. That was not thought to happen at the turn of the 20th century. Incorporate spirituality, traditional spirituality, into the project, that was mentioned. Promote resilience and assist the tribe and community in its activation and problem solving, problem addressing, and activities. Have pride, community's role in the project. Community-based research project, that's what we were talking at the time. These people were telling me over years, a few years ago, but have ownership. They want the tribe to own the research. Respect and promote tribal sovereignty. Express hope for the tribe's future. Those are just some of what I've heard. When I went around this morning, I heard a few more. And I do every time I make this presentation and present this slide. So there's wisdom, the collective wisdom here. And I hope this slide adds a little bit more. Let's go ahead and have a 5-minute break, if that's okay. And we'll come back and finish up and before lunch about research with the Navajo. Everything is public. Everything. All the time. Every time. Everything.
Coffee, can you?
I'm assuming you're talking about
Before I walk around the campus before we eat lunch.
Some that would be like,
Did you come by yourself?
Yeah.
What's your other half?
He's in Safford, Arizona with my son for junior high rodeo. That way.
I know this morning my husband went back to Utah, so he works up there. I said, I'm going to say,
Yeah, he works in Page. SRP, they're breaking down.
yeah.
They're even done with that one. They're gonna tear down center.
Wow. Are you serious? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then the last one we go is DHP.
They're really going to do it.
Yeah, they're in operation. Well, and that one nation's trying to take over SRP. But so there's a lot of bidding going on.
Yes. Interesting.
He does operations.
I thought the roads would be bad coming over the mountain, but it was pretty good. Over the mountain.
Yeah, I drove through worse.
Really?
I went to school at Durango for 2.5 years. So, yeah, I've been over. My son used to go to Lamar, drive through Wolf Creek before they close it. Then I drove through that too with Porsche too.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, this is nothing.
I'm a big chicken.
We've gone through Flagstaff too when it was snowing. We had the truck on the horse trailer.
I think I spun out one time. That's what's good.
The only time we've done that was going to Montana. And it was I hyper.
You're on a Sunday. Yeah, I'm here Sunday too.
It's scary,
Yeah.
huh? Especially when it's going
I'm like,
It's working. Is it
rain
running?
like this. So now when we send, we go tour rodeo. I'm like, I'm not driving through the rain.
So that it's picking up everything we're saying.
Good thing we didn't have a trailer on us.
Hey, how many graduates you got?
Okay.
From your and then 12, 14. Just keep us
I'm already
posted.
6, so I'm like,
Yes. Is that
I
you?
do, yeah, I'm
Oh,
like,
you adult education?
and then he started taking us all out one by one. Yesterday I felt it. I took my son back.
I appreciate you.
Just telling
Yeah,
us,
because we're taking a look at the graduation committee. Okay. I'll get
What grade is your son?
he's going to college. He's a freshman.
Oh, he's a freshman.
Second semester.
Second semester. What's he majoring in?
Biochemistry.
He should have applied for that summer research enhancement program. At Today College. Our SHREP program. We have some students from Florida that applied. So they're in their second year there, yeah. What they do is they do that 10-week program. The first 3 weeks, we do it here. And then they go back to their hometown and they do 6 weeks of their practicum in their hometown. So if they're interested in certain things, they'll place them there with their mentor. You know, like with a diabetes project or something with Indian Health Service.
When is that due?
The deadline is March 8th.
March 8th.
Just come by our office, I'll give you the packet.
Okay. Yeah, he wants to do the internship.
Yeah, they get it, everything's paid for them. Their boards, their meals, they even earn 7 credit hours. And then their books are paid for. And then they get a bi-weekly stipend check.
You got a scholarship and iPad and stuff. He did the Cobell scholarship. He's been doing a lot of scholarships.
Ours is not based on comparing with scholarships, it's just a internship that they do. So, you know, that's extra money that he decides to do. It's a 10-week program. So after the 6 weeks, when they finish their practicum, they come back 1 more week back to Today College here in Saley. And they gather all their data that they gathered when they were doing their practicum, put their PowerPoint presentations together, and then they present the last day on Friday. that families can come and see their presentations. He teaches them a lot of what we talked about, resilience, learning about basically research data analysis.
Is that the summer research program?
Yes. Yeah. So we're recruiting, we're looking for students.
There was an old woman that came saying, my granddaughter wants to be a part of this, but she's still in high school. I guess she was confusing it with the summer bridge program.
Although we do have a program, depending on, Heather Dreyfus, I don't know if you've met her. We work with her. She does that dual credit, high school students with Dene College, with Norwich, an internship.
The high school?
Yes. That would be the person to contact to get the students, and she's doing recruitment. If you want, I can send you the documents for the high school part. They just do it for 1 week, but it's an experience to never forget. And it kind of prepares them for, say, if they got into college, their second year in college, then they can just kind of dive right in.
Oh, great. Yeah, send it to me. I know Reverson, who works with us, is also here. Summer program for high school students. So, yeah.
I will send that.
Okay, leave it. I'll get that information out, and then we'll put it on our student success website.
Yeah. I think that would be good. I think Heather was working on that. What's his name? No. Here at Dene College, the same.
Oh, yeah.
What is his name? He's the guy that puts the information on the web pages.
Oh, wow. Oh, God.
It's at the tip of my tongue, and I'm trying to remember his name. No. Al Adakai?
Oh, yeah, Val.
Val Adakai. Yeah, so I don't know if they put that up there yet or not. So, but if you want, I do have the documents, and I can just shoot those to you.
Yeah, send it to me, and we'll send it out.
And I'll do the same with you. Or you just come to my office. We have copies of, so when students or college students come in, I just give them the packets.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah, so we're recruiting.
Okay.
So far, we've got 3 complete applications, and then probably about 9 that are still interested, and they're still sending in documents. But March 8th, I think, is the deadline for shred. But the other one, I'm not sure when the deadline is. Heather was just here last week, so I only got to communicate with her for just that one day. There was no one's on me. But I'll send it out.
Okay, good.
They're struggling.
All of us who were on there had expired, our terms had expired, but we still kept going because they didn't replace us. So fine, the president, all the so I got it. But the rest of us, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
they have to really have to.
Next to me, we're close.
You know it's cold. I know we grew up with the stove.
But now they hope we're here in suspension, so
Our house has a heater, so the kids on the chopping board. So probably guys
but
have
he's
no
been there.
idea.
I don't do
The one time they built fires and they go see my sister in Cabo. It's the only time they built fires.
And they were for 3 years.
Yeah, our old double wides, my mom and dad could still
It's kind of nice, especially the electricity.
You better not. I want you behind my back.
I think Jeff and now we're trying to teach a novel language. It's hard. But the 2 little ones, my mom's been really keeping up with them. I said, just teach these 2 because these 3 are just. It's well worth it to school at Sophia. The now language is strong in elementary, and then when they go into junior high, they kind of slow it down and drop it. And then they try to pick it back up in high school. By then they forget because he can say from his head to toe every part of Navajo. And now I told Do you remember some? My son can say all of them.
Lunch is coming soon, so let's get started. And I've asked our newcomer to introduce herself.
Yeah, it's Ashik. My name is Barsin Banali. Tolhe Glini, the Shron, Totsoni Bashishin, Ashin, the Shache, Anu, that's Sanjakin, the Shanel, Auto Qua, the Net College, I'm the Faculty of Early Childhood Education and also Faculty of the BA in Education. Yeah, it's Ashik.
And I think everyone will appreciate that I'm not going to introduce myself. We don't have time for that. It's still that much. But I'm Bill Freeman from the Northwest Indian College. So now I want to go to brief history research with the Dene people. And again, I always, as I say thank you, in a loving way, to all my respected teachers, especially my wife, Carolyn Robbins. Okay. Oh, I'm supposed to change that. I'm sorry. Please tell, I should have deleted that slide. Please tell us, are you looking for the handout?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I gave it. Just a minute. Hang on there. I guess I went right by your table, sorry. So please tell us, what is the, I'm talking about health research now, not anthropological or stuff like that. Health research, because that's what I'm familiar with. Let's just go around. What's the earliest, in terms of year? I'm just going to ask that question. Don't worry about the other two. What was the earliest research, health research with the Dene people that you're aware of? Go ahead, just yell out.
I'm aware of diabetes.
Which one was it?
It's adolescence.
Okay, was it, all right, Mr. Jolly?
1940s, 60s. The infamous NIOSH study on U.S. minor in
Okay, thank you.
The earliest one that I can was 1979, where a doctor at Crown Point studied chlamydia.
Chlamydia. Do you remember the year roughly?
Yeah, 1979.
Oh, 79. I should have repeated what you said, Mr. Charlie, was 1940s to 1960s uranium miners. Mark?
I know of reports about Dene health went back much earlier, but as far as something actually researched, I guess I was thinking about when they were setting up at Rough Rock, they were doing intervention there with putting clinics. They were trying out some public health approaches. It was a kind of intervention.
Okay.
I would say around 1950s, probably with the tuberculosis, TB. I could think of that.
The what?
TB.
Tuberculosis.
Oh, TB. Okay. Many farms. Yes. I don't have that. I'm not going to talk about that. I should. I know about it. Ma'am?
When it comes to health-wise, I'm not really sure about research with health, but
Okay, sir? Rock Point model language, okay.
The only thing I can think of also is tuberculosis.
The TB many farms, okay.
Cornell University.
The Cornell University did that. Yeah, I should add it to my, I should have remembered that.
Dr. Annie Wanika really good.
That's right.
Famous one from it.
Annie D. Wanika, there's even a book about her, as you know, or 2 books, I think. Anyone?
I remember the sex TV also in the late 60s, early 70s, the HIV. Who was their study going on?
HIV, I'm not aware of that. I'll come back to you.
1960s, 70s, and 80s, Northwestern University did a lot of research on interviewing traditional Navajo people about Navajo ethno-medical encyclopedia. I'm part of the team.
Oh, okay. I'll come back to learn a little more about that. Yeah.
It was on the same line, along the same lines as tuberculosis.
Okay.
I have no idea, I'm too young.
Hey, I like that. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, yeah, the Navajo Cornell Public Health Project in many farms in the
Okay.
1950s.
Okay.
Yeah, they also looked at research on like a hip problem in Navajos as well.
That's right.
The extent to which the cradle board contributed to
That's correct.
later hip problems.
Right, many farms also, specifically the cradle board, and whether that contributed to what's called hip dysplasia.
Yes. But they also applied for the first time, they hired William Morgan to include Navajo medical terminology in that project.
Oh, they included, I didn't know, may have known that, so including Navajo terminology. I thought Annie D. Wanika did that, but at least with the TB.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, it was the, same as Perry's, the fix of uranium mine.
Uranium mining. Okay, so one reason I asked was in order to learn myself, and I had forgotten about it in the book, The People's Health, about many farms, and that influenced me a lot in my development. So I should have included that. Let's talk. There's one that you probably are not aware of. Again, just from what I said about Native research with Native people earlier, none of these bad examples, there are good examples, but none of the bad examples were contributed to the regulations because they weren't mentioned. In spite of the uranium miners in particular. That was mentioned later, I'll talk about that. So, this is that. And I probably should read what's on my slide and let someone else talk about it. So you can correct me. I would appreciate that. It was actually turned out that it was known that uranium mining caused lung cancer from studies done in the 1930s and 20s in Czechoslovakia. So this was nothing new. And what needed to be done was to regulate how the mining was done. This was in the height of the Cold War. Where do we get uranium? Well, among other things, for our atomic bombs, from here as well as Angola, by the way, excuse me, those uranium mines in Czechoslovakia are now behind the Iron Curtain. And the Atomic Energy Commission refused to regulate mining. Getting the uranium for our atomic and even hydrogen bombs was too important. So what is the public health study knows about those earlier studies? They're very concerned about it. So what they did, they were not, and this was in the days before whistleblowers, what they did was literally, this was the phrase, we'll pile up the bodies at the door in order to finally get be able to get the Atomic Energy Commission to regulate the mining. So what they did was to, here again, natural history. Remember, sir, the USPHS study on syphilis? That was a natural history of untreated syphilis. This is the natural history of unregulated uranium mining. And they did a health exam every 2 years for the miners, most, but not all, of whom were Navajo. They did pile up the bodies at the door. They didn't inform the participants that what we are studying is whether you're going to develop lung cancer from your uranium mining or not. So the informed consent was highly inadequate. The reason they didn't was that the miners wouldn't let them give them access to the miners if they told them, if the Public Health Service told them that. So they were faced with not being able to do the research at all, and therefore not being able to eventually get the AEC to Atomic Energy Commission to regulate mining, or doing this unethical research. They chose to do this research. The bodies piled up at the door by the early 1960s, and that did lead to regulations. This was observational research, and if we had time, I would ask you, so what would you do? What would you have done if you had been a public health service then, and faced with the only two choices, as you understood them? Don't do this research at all, or do it and eventually get AEC to regulate mining. It's a tough choice. But nevertheless, by the way, this eventually did become public to the general research public in around 1995, when there was a report instituted about radiation research. And this was one of the kinds of radiation research that was done, but it was initiated, by some actually whole-bodied radiation experiments at the University of Cincinnati. Now, not all research with the DNA has been bad. And here's one that I haven't heard anyone talk about. And I'm not going to say that the research itself was extraordinarily good. But you'll see why I brought this up. In 1966 or so, the Indian Health Service had required a policy that any research with Indian people needed to be approved by the tribe if the Indian Health Service was involved at all. That was a hook. This was policy of the Indian Health Service. By the way, it was not always observed, but welcome to that club. But it was issued by Emory Johnson, who was the IHS Indian Health Service director. And he and I talked about this. He was the director from 1964 to 68. The very first article that I am aware of in a good medical journal that talked about getting tribal approval was a research on vitamin C. It was a clinical trial of vitamin C in Navajo kids in Navajo schools. And they got both the permission of both the schools and the Navajo Council itself. And they said that in the paper that was published in the New England Journal, very prestigious journal. This is the first ever published article that I'm aware of, and other people are aware of, that because I learned from other people, that mentions getting tribal approval. That's an advance. I don't know what was said by the researchers to the tribe, so I'm not going to guarantee it fits all what we would want now, but at least it was a start. And it was led here. This was experimental research. That's important. We can do experimental research. It's sometimes acceptable. Just because it's experimental doesn't mean never. It all depends on what it's being done for and why, etc. And you'll see another example of that in a minute. That's the article if you want to look at it. Okay. What is, I should go back, don't look at your handout. What is the precipitating event for the Navajo Tribal Code and for the Navajo itself, IRB? Anyone? The precipitating event. Martha's pointing to someone, I don't know.
Mark. We're all looking at Mark.
No one's going to say anything? Okay. Antivirus. I was hoping someone would remember that, Mr. Morgan. Particularly, that's why I asked earlier, when did you start? So, just remind you about hantavirus. This is an epidemic that had started when I was moving from the research program in Tucson, and the health service research program in Tucson to Albuquerque. I'm driving up from Tucson to Albuquerque, and I'm hearing on NPR radio about some epidemic called the Navajo flu, an outbreak on the Navajo res. This has killed 50% of the people infected, and it was primarily young, healthy people. In fact, the thing that really drove the epidemic was a couple who were together. Both were athletes, a young man and a young woman. And both went in one day after the other, or 2 days apart, to the ER, and were dead in about 24 to 48 hours. And no one knew anything about it. It was first recognized on the Navajo res, but wasn't only there. We have since found out it's in 49 of the 50 states. I don't know what state does not have it, probably Alaska. This was an astounding scientific discovery by the Centers for Disease Control. It was the first time what's called PCR was used to find out what is the cause of an epidemic. And because it was the first time, it took 10 days. It's now a day or two, down to that fast. But this was a tremendous scientific achievement. It was found to be in the deer mice. Yes, ma'am.
What is PCR?
Okay. I'll look it up. I'm having a senior moment. I mean, I know it. I'm just having a senior moment. It's basically a way of expanding the number of segments of DNA that contain a different gene, expanding the number. But I'll let you know. I'll look it up maybe during lunch and tell everyone. I should have been prepared by looking for that. Anyone know what PCR is?
It says right here, polymerase chain reaction.
There you go.
So it says it on the...
I Googled it.
Okay. Repeat it again.
Wikipedia says.
Polymerase chain reaction.
Polymerase.
Yes.
Okay, polymerase?
Polymerase chain reaction.
It's a way of expanding, to, say, 1 million times, say, a small sample, only a few, say, excuse me, genes, into 1 million genes, and then you can look at differences among them. So, the CDC helped Navajo develop prevention activities, which is to separate people from the deer mice. There was, if you will, an epidemic. The rainfall was just right. Earlier in the year, there was a lot of pinion nuts. Deer mice like pinion nuts. Their population expanded. And then deer mice and human beings started to interact. And it's carried by deer mice. It doesn't kill them in the urine of deer mice, basically. And what basically happened is CDC, Gallup became what's called Atlanta West. CDC is based in Atlanta. You had a huge number of CDCers coming out to Gallup. They worked very well together with the Navajo Nation Department of Health. And I know the woman who was then the director, and she said that. They also knew, Navajo Nation Department of Health, that this is going to be written up. It should be written up. It's important. It's a public health issue. It is for the rest of the nation. It needs to know about hantavirus, because as it turns out, it's in 49 of the 50 states. And they asked the Centers for Disease Control, it was a verbal asking, don't give Navajo place names in your articles. Why? May remember. And for those who are too young to remember, you'll learn. There was, Navajo chapter names were used, and the national TV and everyone else came out to record and show on national TV the burials and mention the Navajo place names. And there was one chapter, I should say chapter names, there was one chapter that seemed to have most of them, and it was called the epicenter of the epidemic. And again, I don't need to say how, you already know what it would feel like to have your burials on national TV and to have your chapter named. It was just, well, you know, again, people thinking about leaving people to think about dying and death in private. Duh. But that's what it was. Well, the first article came out, it was about hantavirus in people. Came out in December in a very prestigious journal called Science. And guess what? It had chapter names of where people lived who got hantavirus, infected with hantavirus. Now, Indian Health Service was involved, and I should have reviewed that article beforehand. As Director of Research for IHS, I'm supposed to review, and Chair of the IRB, I'm supposed to review every article that's published before it's published. It didn't even come to me. But I did, of course, read it as soon as it was published, and I recognized that's not good. So then Navajo asked in writing CDC to never do it again. Now, the prime author was the person who developed the PCR, polymerase chain reaction, and applied it to this. So he's off in his lab. He's a big deal. But who cares about this stuff? I don't know if anyone even told him. And so the next article was to be published in June, and it was looking at the where were the deer mice, and what animals, they captured a whole lot of animals, small animals. Where were the deer mice who were infected, but again, they didn't die from it, were carriers of this hantavirus? Where were they captured using Navajo place names? I did get to review it ahead of time. And I said, you got to do something other than chapter names. You need to use, suppose, what's the satellite? The GPS. Or just some arbitrary ABCD. And if someone is going to do research later to see what's the rate there, you find out who it is, you know, from the author, what chapter is ABCD, what chapters. But you don't have to, there are ways to report without using chapter names. CDC came back and said, what's GPS? Now, this is early in GPS, but I mean, you know, they should know better. And guess what? In spite of what I said, in June, that article had chapter names. Navajo was so upset that the IRB did not meet for 13 months because none of the Navajo people were members of the Navajo IHS IRB would show up. No research was approved for 13 months. Meanwhile, Office of Tribal Attorneys developed the code, and Navajo established its own IRB, at which time I said, hey, it doesn't make any sense to have two IRBs for Navajo Nation, one IHS and one Navajo Nation. The policy of the Indian Health Service will be the Navajo Nation IRB will be the IHS IRB. There'll be one. And Navajo Nation will control it. But the lesson still was, I could not protect Navajo Nation. And after that, I started saying in uniform and out of uniform. I was a public health service officer, captain, to tribes, publicly, at any time, in any dress. You need to protect yourself. You cannot rely on the Indian Health Service, IRB, and me personally to protect you because I failed. Period. I was very upset. And that's why I've been promoting tribal IRBs and tribal codes and you name it, ever since. That was the lesson for me. Think about for half a minute, what were the harms? Why was this considered harmful to the Navajo Nation? What was the harm?
Stigmatism.
Stigmatism, violations of privacy, not listening to a valid request, not respecting the Navajo Nation and saying, look, they had the values not to use our place names so that they wouldn't be associated with Navajo Nation and the chapters would not be associated with this. And they were ignored. That's not being respectful. They were disrespected. That's the harm. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add that, interestingly, I was coordinating the Elder Hostel program that was hosted here at Navajo Community College at the time when this outbreak occurred. And then it became known as the Navajo disease, and enrollment of pre-registered attendees dropped significantly, as well as tourism to Navajo for fear of contracting this unknown Navajo disease.
It was also called the Navajo flu. The people would drive on I-40 with a surgical mask on. I think even worse than what happened with the Elder Hostel was a nearby university that will be unnamed except it's in New Mexico, had a summer youth basketball camp. And the Navajo kids were involved like other kids from other high schools. Come this epidemic, they were disinvited. Kids, teenagers, high schoolers. It was a serious issue. So, again, we talk about harms to communities as defined by the communities, not as defined by a researcher. I suspect that the researcher who developed the PCR, the apply here, the sounding scientific, had no idea and may still not have an idea. I don't know, I haven't spoken to him, about what was wrong by not listening to him at that time. Well, but like the ASU study at Havasupai, this also had good results. Your own IRB. Okay? And the IHS saying, your IRB will be our IRB for the Navajo area. Good. And your tribal code. So there were good results out of this bad experience. But that's why I call it good, but good just in terms of finding out what it was about the virus, bad in terms of not respecting Navajo Nation. Okay. Good research.
Bill?
Yeah.
I might just stick in a note here that the college is convening a 2-day conference on hantavirus, April 8th and 9th.
I think I can speak loudly enough, but this will help. We are convening a 2-day conference, April 8th and 9th, on hantavirus. There may be a few other related illnesses included in the topics, but it'll mainly be hantavirus. And we will have some of the original people with the Department of Health who were involved, and people from CDC who were involved coming to that. And we'll talk about some of the more recent developments with it as well, but that might be of interest to all of you here.
Thank you. Were people outsiders like me invited?
I was just thinking.
I'm not talking about invited to make a presentation, invited to listen. I forgot the head of the Navajo Nation Department of Health, her name. I hope she's still with us and would be coming. She'd be very good. CDC knows about this, by the way, of what went wrong. I mean, this is nothing new. I'm not saying anything the CDC doesn't know. It's just they know it now. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the people in Gallup West did not know about this experience until I told them just a few years ago about the impact of those articles. Anyway, thank you, Mark. Good research. The diabetes. What did I do? Hello? Mid-1990s. This was a multi-center clinical research, randomized clinical trial. And you know about the DPP, Diabetes Prevention Program. Almost everyone knows about it, or has at least heard what are the results, because you hear it on radio and TV and public health messages a lot. It is, just to remind you, it's for people at risk for diabetes, exercise 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, moderate exercise, lose 7%, low-fat diet. That's the standard stuff. It came from the DPP, Diabetes Prevention Program. It consisted of 27 centers. 3 of the 27 centers were Native people, Shiprock, with the demand, Pueblo Zuni, and the Gila River Indian community. So it involved the Navajo in an experiment in which, by the way, that number, 171 out of 3,700 were native. That was intentional. They actually oversampled native people because of the problem with diabetes that native people have. I already said what it does. That's the standard stuff. This was an experiment. It randomized people to standard care, to 4 groups, either standard care, flip of the coin. And depending on what flip you got, that's where you ended up in. Standard care, which is to say nothing special. Intense counseling to adopt the lifestyle changes that we have there. Taking metformin, third one was taking metformin, and a fourth one, which is a standard diabetes drug, and a fourth one was to take a new anti-diabetes drug that at the time had not been approved by the FDA. It was one tribe, one of those 3 tribes actually refused to let its members go to that 4th arm, the drug that had been approved. By the time the study actually began, the drug had been approved by the FDA. Just coincidentally, it turns out that drug was later withdrawn by the FDA because it caused a serious liver disease, including liver failure, in a very, very small number of people. But when spread nationwide, it wasn't worth it. That's not why the tribe refused to let its members go there. It was because it hadn't been approved by the FDA. Now, the multi-center randomized clinical trial of 27 centers, everyone had a very precise, had to observe what the protocol was, the plan, research plan, precisely. And yet they let the center for that one tribe to go ahead and randomly allocate to only 3 arms, not 4. By the way, it's not a problem at all. It's a statistical management can deal with that. But it does show that even in something like a multi-center randomized clinical trial with a very strict research plan that everyone has to adhere to, it is possible for tribes, at least some of the time, to actually make exceptions for them, for themselves, so long as it can be handled statistically, it doesn't actually violate the conditions of doing the research scientifically. That's important to know. No one else got to have anything special, but this particular tribe, it was not Navajo, did. That's what I just said. So that was an experiment. That was actually a great research, now being used, has been used ever since. I'll just add a personal note. I was director of research, chair of the IRB. We had to review the protocol, and we did. We approved it. We required some changes, but that was okay. I'll just let you know, as an IHSer, physician, and before I went through the research program, I was a specialist in family medicine. For 5 years, I was head of the diabetes special program for the Portland area. The general interpretation that I heard from IHSers was that Indian people will not comply, will not exercise, will not change their diet, will not lose weight, and so this won't apply to them. Wrong. They did. They responded in the same degree as every other group. That's important to know. It's important for the IHS researchers, not researchers, doctors, to stop being so negative about tribal people. They responded very much the same, and that's why, in fact, it's emphasized with tribes, because it was proven to work with those people, Indian people, in this research. So you'd be congratulated, both for participating in the research, Shiprock, as well as proving those naysayers wrong. Thank you very much to all the people who did that. I should see it. Lunch is here. Any comments?
Bill?
Yes.
Back about 1990. Back about 1994, we were doing interviews for a research project that was here at the college. And we went over into Aneth, Utah, and talked to many diabetics over there. This was about lifestyle change in diet. And what I saw in my interviews was that a lot of those people, significant number, can't tell you exactly how many, but I felt that there was a significant number of people that changed their diet, went on strict diet that did not include a lot of carbohydrates and sweets and so forth. They actually got off their medications and they were actually recovering from diabetes. And so that's what I noticed, very firsthand, directly.
As a person before I became research director, treated a lot of people with diabetes, and after I became research director, continued to see patients actually in the Santa Fe clinic when we moved to Albuquerque once a week. Had many patients that yes, if they caught it early, they could actually reverse the diabetes. I don't know how long that lasted. I do know that there are examples of women and men, although it's primarily women for some reason. Maybe they're more concerned about their health. I know I'm characterizing males there negatively compared to women, but hey, so I think it might be generally accurate, that have been at high risk for diabetes and exercise and follow the diet and have not developed diabetes for decades. Now, that doesn't prove, that's not a scientific study and randomized that, but it certainly does seem to work. It at least postpones it, and maybe postpones it basically permanently. I want to thank everyone for allowing me to come to the land of the Dene and to speak to you. It's a privilege to do that, and I've learned, I assure you, I've learned a lot from you. I hope to learn more in the next day and a half. And on other things, to get many farms. And but I think it's time for lunch. Thank you. High school, see you.
Okay, yeah, Dr. Freeman. All right, I hope you're hungry. If not, good. I think the weight room is open. So if you're not hungry, you know, a few laps on the treadmill, and then lunch will be waiting for you. So it is currently 12:52. We'll go ahead and stay on schedule. So lunch is ready. You're welcome to eat here. You're welcome to, if you would like a change of scenery, go ahead and take your lunch elsewhere if you prefer. You might be locked out in the cold, but if you leave the building, I tried to, I politely requested that security unlock the doors on the side. I'm not sure whether that's happened or not, but we'll go ahead and stay on schedule. We'll plan to start up again at 1:30. And at 1:30, we'll have a discussion about the kind of research that's currently taking place here at Diné College. And that will be, we'll have about an hour-long discussion. It'll be open discussion. We'll all share a lot of the knowledge we have about the research that has been taking place historically here at Diné College, and also that is currently taking place, or that we might imagine will be taking place in the future. And then we'll do some, this will all be like discussion guided by Dr. Freeman, but also to share that information with him so that he can help to facilitate us in the follow-up session in which we practice IRB review and decision making. We do some kind of mock IRB reviews together. So 1:30 and we'll start up again. Everybody enjoy your lunch. Go ahead. Oh, it's there.
Is it there?
Get sandwiches. And,
Peace.
yeah.
Breakfast was much larger.
Breakfast was lunch. And lunch is breakfast. That's like a little bunch. Hopefully, you saved your blue corn mushrooms. I was surprised at the breakfast because I was told we were only going to have a little bit of fruit and a Danish. And it went all over.
Well, she was here.
Oh, you're recording.